říkali, že to bude hlavně pro univerzitu. Co je dobrý.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. If there's friends in the back who want to sit down, so if you don't mind, if you can scooch in a little bit. I know it's hard to give up that little special seat at the end, but if there is a seat and you can make space for one more, that's always very generous. Friends, don't feel shy to join us on the sides. It's beautiful to have a full house tonight, and it's also beautiful for all of our friends online. Hello. Welcome to CSM in Virtual Realm. So, we are really, really excited and welcome. Thanks for joining for the launch of Digital Innovation Season 2025 and Earthsuits, which is really experiencing its first moment as a multi-year research initiative and collaboration initiative rising out of CSM, but hopefully with tendrils near and very, very far. So a little bit about Digital Innovation Season. It's a platform for exploring emerging technologies, creativity, and culture in our rapidly evolving world. And it emerged out of the pandemic when everyone was very lonely and wanted to find ways to connect to people outside of just coursework and that kind of thing. But we actually found at CSM that it's really, really important that we have a platform for people across courses, across disciplines, to come together and collaborate and think through big ideas that actually touch on all of us, no matter what specific discipline we're coming from. So that's the goal. And Digital Innovation Season happens every February. It's a rare space, really, for not only students, but for staff to meet, engage, and collaborate. And you can go to the website. The QR is somewhere in here. And see, there you go, if you want. You can see the full schedule of events, which include talks like this one, mostly on Wednesdays. There's an odd Thursday. Workshops, so there's different workshops on various technical skills, avatar building, Houdini, if you want to amp up or get introduced to some skills. And then a world build next week that we're really going to encourage all of you to sign up for because it's a multi-day event with mentors and cash prizes and all sorts of really, really fun ways to help build the first London 2050 Earthsuits collection, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But it's my really great pleasure to be able to curate Digital Innovation Season for a second year in a row. Last year, our topic and theme was called planetary sensing. And we were thinking about the ways that the planet senses and maps itself through satellites and sensors on the ground and all sorts of things. And out of that project, in the way that you kind of, in a group of people, all of a sudden have an epiphany, we thought, well, maybe sensing could be more intimate. And the idea of Earthsuits was born. So this idea is certainly an evolution from the thinking that we did last year, and you can watch all the lectures that we did last year on YouTube. They remain fascinating. Just like we're streaming this live, we've been capturing all of the work that we're thinking as we go. And before I go into detail about Earthsuits, both the kind of practical side as well as the philosophical side, I want to offer up some thank yous because while I stand here, there's a huge team behind this production on all the different dimensions. So it's my delight to have the leadership and support of CSM Digital Partnerships Manager, Stefan Selu. He's right here. He is like a force of nature at CSM, making all sorts of amazing things happen. So thank you, Steph. We're SS and SS, so joining meetings is not only fun to be the Stephs in partners in crime, but just really fun to be in production together. CSM Technical Manager for Digital and Emerging Technologies, John Woolston, who's sort of a secret force behind CSM Emerging Technologies and one of the people really behind Digital Innovation Season. Earthsuits producer, the project would not be possible without Earthsuits producer, materials researcher, and CSM Emmy Material Futures graduate, Rachel Pearl. Thank you, Rachel, wherever you are. Was always on with the project, making it happen. Graphic designer, Eleonora Ortolani, and MA Narrative Design student, Transreality Technologist, Systems Designer, and Researcher, Kay Altamira Bustamante for the amazing, beautiful graphics and video content that you're seeing. And as you know, you can also follow us on Instagram, where we're kind of not only rolling out content and information about what's happening on the ground as part of Digital Innovation Season, but really the visual research that we're collecting in all of our feeds as we discover that Earthsuits is a concept that just is pervasive and all around us. It's also really important to thank, I know there's so many thank yous, CSM's executive leadership for funding the initiative, and the Student Experience Fund for making sure that next week during the World Build there's snacks and cash prizes and DJs at the end of the day and all sorts of fun things for the people that participate. I also want to thank my collaborator on the Earthsuits philosophy. So if you go to earthsuits.space, that's a website where we've put some of the philosophy that you'll hear tonight. Lukáš Likavčan, and you'll hear from him. We have the great pleasure of having him with us all month as an Earthsuits Fellow. And he's also joining us on MA Narrative Environments and MA Industrial Design, where we're running a parallel brief as part of this project on Earthsuits collection. So some of you, as you know in the room, have the great fortune of spending 7 weeks thinking about and developing Earthsuits. And it's just been an absolute amazing thing to launch this initiative with Lukáš. It's so much more fun to write together. There's also many people in this room who are already kind of lined up to be part of this initiative. This is just the beginning, and Digital Innovation Season is just the beginning. So we hope that this is a long-term research project with lots of tendrils, and there's many friends in the audience and online who we hope will continue these investigations with us, as I said, both as part of CSM and UAL and far, far beyond. So thank you so much for joining us, and make sure you follow. Okay, now about Earthsuits a little bit as an initiative. As you probably read online, it's a design research project. Life on Earth is becoming more and more unpredictable, and we're interested in wearables. And as I mentioned to our students this morning, the project kind of picks up at the point where fashion is awesome and fashion is terrible. Yeah, fashion is like pervasive and it's exciting and it's one of the most amazing phenomena, and it's also a real planetary problem. And so we're really interested in thinking about this history of fashion and the future of fashion as wearables, as functional gear, workwear, uniforms, building on the histories of how space innovation has actually changed the kinds of materials we use, the kind of technologies we use. So we're really thinking about whether it's devices or garments or gear or membranes, how they actually support navigation, communication, and adaptation on a changing planet Earth. And so if you think about this history of clothing, not only as ornament, but also as protection and identification, and then you take that forward to think about where that's going, we have a kind of a new paradigm on our hand. We'll talk about that much more as we get into the presentation with Lukáš, and I are going to start in just a minute. But we've also invited two guests to join us on this panel tonight, Xin Liu and Michael Salu, to kind of offer their perspectives, because they have practices that really connect with the work that we're doing on Earthsuits. So the structure for the evening is Lukáš and I, who co-wrote the Earthsuits philosophy, will go back and forth and share some of these key ideas with you. Then we'll invite Xin, who I'll introduce, and I'll go through all the bios so we don't have to disrupt the flow of the conversation. But we'll invite Xin to come up, share some of her work, and offer us some provocations. And the same with Michael, who's joining us online in Berlin. And then we'll open it up really to you to ask questions and have a conversation that we hope continues for the rest of the month. Okay, so a few bios before we jump into actually some of the deep content. Okay. Lukáš Likavčan is a philosopher who focuses on emerging technologies, ecology, and astronomy. He is a research fellow at the University of Gießen's panel on planetary thinking and Center for AI and Culture at NYU Shanghai. And Lukáš is also bringing a lot of our friends in Asia and Southeast Asia to the network of Earthsuits, so that it's really not only a London thing, it's actually a global thing and a planetary thing. Lukáš also offers consultancy services to private companies, public institutions, and NGOs. He was affiliated as a visiting researcher with Leiden Observatory. I'm not going to say this German word. Universität Wien, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, Academy of Fine Arts Design in Bratislava, and Earth Life Science Institute at Tokyo Tech. Xin Liu is an artist and engineer whose work probes the tension between the measurable and the indescribable, between scales that are both in and beyond our daily experience. Through the creation of experiments and experiences, she investigates her interests centered around the verticality of space, extraterrestrial explorations, and cosmic metabolism. As an artist in residence at SETI Institute, she is deeply engaged in the intersection of scientific inquiry and artistic practice. From launching payloads to the International Space Station to exhibiting at institutions like MoMA PS1 and the Shanghai Biennale, Xin's work moves fluidly across disciplines and scale. And Michael Salu, as I mentioned, who's joining us online from Berlin, is a writer, artist, and creative director whose practice traverses literature, visual art, and digital culture. His work is rooted in storytelling and deeply attuned to the ways technology shapes our collective consciousness. He is the author of Red Earth and What Lies Beyond the Red Earth, as well as the editor of Cybernetics or Ghosts. Michael also runs a creative research practice called House of Thought, which focuses on bridging creative, critical thinking and technology. He has an upcoming show in London at the Photographers Gallery as part of a creative research group called Planetary Portals, which opens in March, and we weren't sure about the date, but we'll ask Michael to plug the opening when he gets there. And just as a moment of introduction, because I realize many of you know me, but not all of you, I'm Stephanie Sherman. I'm the course leader for MA Narrative Environments. I'm a designer, producer, and strategist. I work with a think tank called Antikythera, which focuses on the philosophy of technology. And I'm working on a book and a big research project about platform automation amongst all of this exciting work that we get to do together. Okay, so, yes, and we will go. So I'll invite Lukáš to come join me up here for this, but I'll start with this sort of introduction here. And you have to. So, as I mentioned, Earthsuits came out of this idea of planetary sensing, but it also came out of a problem space that I've had for a long time, mostly pre-pandemic, as someone that travels the world, and would find that I'd have these really chaotic itineraries where I'd be going from one continent to another in really poor carbon fashion, but there was never the right jacket, right? Because you're going from like one climate to another climate to another climate, and you're like, I just need a jacket that actually is fit for purpose. And I had this dream of having a 7-layer jacket that was like, instead of having 30 jackets for different kind of climates and conditions, it was one jacket with 7 layers that could do all of these different things. And in my life, actually, get rid of all those jackets and just have one jacket. And I've tried to find this jacket, and I have spent many times drawing this jacket, but it appeared to me that like there's a lot of focus, even as there's focus on gear, there's not actually focus on deep function. Like how can we actually create things that make sense for nomadism, exploration, different ways of living on this planet. And then the more you think about it, actually, fashion history is pretty amazing because you look at the ways that things that become fashionable, like the bomber jacket, you forget every day that the bomber jacket emerges out of World War bombers and fighters. And you have Amelia Earhart and all these technologists and explorers who look incredibly fashionable in doing their thing that they're doing. And that this is actually this really incredible dynamic between the kind of things that we wear every day and things that were made for one purpose and then adapted aesthetically for another. Now, I don't know about you, but I've also been kind of obsessed my whole life with all of the interesting gear and wear that people have to wear to explore different kinds of environments on the Earth that are not kind of our normal streetwear, shall we say. So, you know, firefighters, this is increasingly important on this planet. Deep sea divers, and of course, like the inevitable spacesuit, which the whole history we'll get into, but really this kind of broad history of the kind of things that we clothe ourselves with, that we add to our being to make it navigable, to make places uninhabitable navigable. And you get these lovely images like this, where you just have tons of gear that serves all sorts of different purposes that are also in some ways part of the history of wearables. not just technology. Of course, there's also tons and tons of science fiction that we can take inspiration from in the landscape of Earthsuits. And while tonight's presentation, we don't have that many references, I'm sure in your head you have 5 or 6 Earthsuits that you can just conjure up from various movies you've seen about the future. And there's always a particular aesthetic here. We're thinking both about how we can advance and change that aesthetic. Why is that the aesthetic of what we're always seeing? Finally, there's some feeds that we've been following online. If you follow Earthsuits, we'll link you to them, that also shape this history. So if you're familiar with the history of Burberry's and the history of the trench coat, not only came out of the World War I trenches, but Burberry's was actually sponsoring adventures and expeditions to make the trench coat seem more popular to people on the street. So it's not just about these adventures and actually what was made functional, but kind of the way that these adventures were sensationalized. And then most of you, even if you have a trench coat, probably haven't made this connection. So bringing it all back to this. Lukáš.
Thank you, Stephanie. So obviously the name spacesuits is an allusion to, or the name Earthsuits is an allusion to the word spacesuits. And this allusion is also some way how we want to expand beyond the usual connotations of what we consider to be spacesuits. And I explain in a moment a little bit about like space and Earth and how we understand the position of the Earth in outer space, etc. But I am reminded, especially now, about a recent experience when I visited a museum in the central province of China called Hunan, where I've seen these T-shaped clothes which are meant to cover the deceased body. And these T-shaped clothes are meant to help the person to travel to the world of the dead, to the netherworld. So in a way, you can think about this as a spacesuit before spacesuit. It's also a kind of traveling device, something that helps a certain kind of extraterrestrial mobility, if you will. What is important in our interpretation of wearables, whether it's very old wearables, such as Fei, the T-shaped clothing that you've seen on the previous picture, or whether it is very new kinds of wearables and clothing, such as spacesuits, for us what is important is how to position this kind of interpretation of wearables into the history of technology. So spacesuits are, after all, for us, technological feat, first of all. It is an envelope, any spacesuit is an envelope of artificial atmosphere equipped with different special sensors. And in this sense, spacesuit is something like a wearable spaceship. So we maintain that clothing is the first human technology in this sense. And to demonstrate this, we borrow from Marshall McLuhan's idea of media technologies as extensions of human body. This makes us think about how the clothing itself represents the paradigmatic exosomatic prosthetics, some kind of prosthetics that reaches beyond the body. It is a wearable technology, just as spacesuit is a wearable spaceship. And so the problem that many times hampers this realization is the softness of textiles, as Laura Tripaldi reminds us in her marvelous book, Parallel Minds. Textiles simply do not fit the dominant cultural imagination of technology, technology coded as either big humming machines or sleek, discrete objects connected by wires and invisible electromagnetic waves. So there is a parallel history of technology and of technical evolution that is unlocked with the agenda of Earthsuits. We think about clothing as the human ancestral technology. We think about clothing as something that challenges the views that the first technologies are fire, stone, or bone tools. Instead, it is soft materials, textiles, weaving. And when it comes to softness and soft materials, textiles, and different forms of weaving, spacesuits of different kinds surely belong to this kind of alternative history. And this is something that one of our dear guests later this month, Nicolas de Monchaux, explains in his wonderful 2011 book called Spacesuit Fashioning Apollo. The technological perspective on clothing also hints at an aspect of wearables as functional gear. Clothes are tools of protection, supporting armatures of work, and of innovation, of course, as well. So they are provisions of technical augmentations to our bodies. And for our project, the crucial functional aspect of clothing here is adaptability, the ability to adapt. And so we aim to probe the history of wearables as technologies that begin with the body and its gear. Clothing here becomes something like an essential infrastructure of climate adaptation, a technology that for us negotiates the threshold between the planet and the body. This brings me to a little bit of positioning in relationship to Earth and space. Not just the outer space, but also the space of our planet, the interior of our planet in this sense. With Earthsuits, we aim to demonstrate how clothing and environments form a dynamic loop of conditioning and transcending each other. For this reason, we ask, for what Earth do we design? Which is a question that I've originally posed in a 2019 book, Introduction to Comparative Planetology. Answering this question, one has to note first, together with San Ra, that space is the place, which means, first of all, that Earth must be seen in the perspective of its cosmic placing, as we can see also on this picture over here. While all the famous images, such as the 1972 photographs of the blue marble, appeal to different forms of one-worldism, you know, these universalist visions of the one world, we prefer to talk about the importance of the position from where these images are taken, which is the ultimate environment of the outer space's void. This void reminds us that the Earth, with all its inhabitants, is also in space, out there, orbiting a star in a quiet corner of an unremarkable galaxy. And so this cosmic perspective has important implications for thinking about climate adaptation today. Above all, one can see the Earth as the continuation of the cosmic metabolisms that also Xin is going to talk a little bit about today. Cosmic metabolisms that highlight the earthly applicability of technologies that deal with inhabiting the extraterrestrial sites. So if space is a kind of final frontier, clothing, fashion, wearables, that is the first frontier.
Okay, idea 4 is about deep function, utility, and uniforms. And so, as we've been talking about, it's not just, as we see Earthsuits as kind of helping us navigate really unfamiliar terrain with sort of strange appendages that augment things, but really thinking about functions also in its more mundane sense, right? All the ways in which your phone is both one of the most functional devices, but it also, as I keep saying today, wastes one of your whole hands, these incredible evolutionary devices, on talking with it through your fingers. And we're at the precipice of actually tons of emerging technologies that allow these functions to shift and evolve in all sorts of different ways. So this is part of the exploration. It also reminded me, as I was putting this presentation together, of a wonderful scene written by Charles Fourier, who is part of the Utopian Socialists, who wrote all of these kind of fantastical political studies, but really about imagining phalanxes of people who are sort of communally living. And one of the things he mentions is imagining that people would have clothes that would only button in the back, and so that they had to be buttoned by a partner, right? Like that this interdependence of others on clothing is one sort of function that we can imagine coming out of society. There's all sorts of ways we can imagine societies configured by clothing. Now, of course, as we've been saying, there's other real functions that might be driven, and real utility that might be driven by the project of Earthsuits. From the deep sea to more kind of hazmat suits as we navigate terrain and atmospheres and environs that are no longer hospitable, to kind of things that somehow traverse this idea with a more aesthetic dimension, from kind of hacking both in the cybersphere to hacking sort of various forms of infrastructure in this kind of typical aesthetic. Now, we'll come back to this, but it's also to say that it's amazing, just if you study the history of clothing itself, how much more functional our clothing has become. So if you are a woman in the 1800s, you probably had a few servants and you were wealthy enough to do so. You had some servants who would put on the 10 to 15 layers that you needed to just leave the house and go meet some friends. And so we've already evolved this. Now, one of the places that's an inspiration to us in terms of this kind of studying this function and utility is the Westminster Menswear Archive. It's based at the university. And they have this incredible archive. This is one of the places that we hope to visit over the next month and explore and get some inspiration from. Now, the connection between function and utility and uniform is across a spectrum, because it's not only that function might serve this really utilitarian purpose, but that we also know that kind of function is served by the way that clothes bring groups of people together or signal different kinds of forms of status or convey different kinds of action. So as you can tell, I'm from the United States, and we have this weird thing called Girl Scouts. I wish it was just Scouts so that everybody could just be together. But the point here is that you earn badges for different actions that you do. So if you learn to sew, you get a little badge for sewing, and you learn to code, and you get a badge for coding. And just like the military, this is a way of kind of expressing different skills, but also evolving and creating unity. There's also something that really appeals to me about the uniform, and many people tend to think that uniform means the same, but as we know from school uniforms and kind of this history, that there's lots of ways of expressing yourself even if the clothes are standardized and the same. And you do that through scrunch socks and size and all sorts of ways of modifying uniformity. And so also the project really calls into question why we think that standardization is always sameness. That actually some forms of more standardization allow for just equivalent differentiation. So we're not imagining Earthsuits that are just the same for all, but that we can create them. And then we don't want to just kind of dismiss, in some ways, the way that aesthetic ornamentation or augmentation also signals political action or political expression. So this is a photo of the zoot suits, which became really a way of expressing kind of a radical position against kind of more traditional social mores about political expression. So we want to take that into account. And I don't know if this video will automatically play, but we'll come back to this in terms of deep function. We don't need to, but it's just the ways that now emerging technologies are allowing us to connect the kind of functions between appendages and extensions of the body with kind of other forms of communication and connection. So you have someone who invents a glove that translates sign language into audio and allows for language translation in this whole other way. Okay, point 5, universal basic luxury. This is one of the themes that comes out of narrative environments, but it's very, very important to us, especially in our position here at CSM. So luxury, we think about it as exclusivity, scarcity, rarity. That doesn't seem like the kind of luxury we want or luxury we need for the world. Actually, luxury for all is what we really would like to imagine. And there's a whole history of the 20th century and certain movements really going for this, that luxury for all is the thing that we were aspiring to, and we believe that we should still be aspiring to luxury for all. We had students work on a project last year with Estee Lauder, and one of the conclusions was that luxury is water. Luxury is not these exclusive rare materials. It's actually water is becoming a luxury. And you'll know, and I mentioned this morning, that if you've been camping or even been on a really long flight, you know that taking a shower certainly feels like a luxury. This is the kind of luxury we're talking about fundamental things that sort of open up this expression of like the true sensation of what's luxurious for human beings. Now we can take this in the opposite direction, where we have something like the miners in the United States for whom Levi's blue jeans were invented, and that workwear becomes a luxury. So it also goes in the other direction, as many of you who study fashion know. Now, in terms of the history of wearables, there's also something like the luxury of eyesight. So many of you joined me in this room in wearing glasses, and at one point in history, this was a luxury. Having the ability to have a set of spectacles manufactured and the ability to see the stage was a luxury. In other forms, something like sunglasses was being manufactured by Inuits to protect themselves from the glare of the sun on the snow, and that these then get amplified into a sensation of the kind of the status symbol of sunglasses that signal celebrity and cool and all sorts of these sorts of things. Now, aren't we all lucky that you can pick one of these pairs up on the side of the street for super cheap, if only they were recyclable and we could send them back to the earth. Now, there's all sorts of really cool brands out there that are playing with this already, and maybe your Insta feed is as full of them as mine are, but we also know that luxury fashion is also sometimes at the edge and presenting where this could go, the aesthetics of where this could go. But part of the project of Earthsuits is really to say, let's not keep it here. Let's not keep it at this moment of exclusivity, but let's use exclusivity to think about what can actually be distributed at scale. Okay, finally, for me in this section is thinking about climate metabolisms and mobile architecture. So that part of the Earthsuits project is also exploring, we work in the spatial practices department in narrative environments. We think a lot about space and architecture and where architecture starts and stops. And so the question for us can be, where does a coat stop and a shelter begin, for example? And you know, we're not the first people in architecture to think about this. There's a whole history of experimental architecture that has explored from the helmet to the shelter to the mobile house. How can actually kind of architecture not be like a fixed scaffold, but actually be part of the human form? And you know, something that I've always thought about is this question of like temperature control, right? So we're very used to thinking, okay, we're going to temperature control a space or a building, right? But why don't we just temperature control ourselves? We try to, but often many of us have very different temperatures sitting in this room, and it makes a lot more ecological sense, potentially, to efficiently think about how we just modify our bodies. So part of the Earthsuits project is also thinking about what are the secondary effects that will happen to buildings as a result of changing what we wear and how we wear it. Now, just to say that there's a mobility dimension here. So I spent a lot of time living in California, and I used to call my car my fat suit because I couldn't get anywhere without it. But it's really important, I think, not only to think about these Earthsuits as that, like, and all I did was think about, how do I shrink the car down? Like, this thing is so big to have to move around in this big machine. It would be much better if, you know, I had motorized roller skates or bicycles or with small shelters, right? So this is also part of it, is how do Earthsuits actually enable mobility in another dimension? And how does that also shape our ideas about nomadism, where we live, ideas about permanence, and how that might transform as climate change continues to shape the world.
And so speaking about climate change, this also brings us to survival and different means of survival. So if you really look at this first from like a very micro perspective, the first thing to note is the existence of different kinds of filtering membranes. Their aim is simple. Whether it is organism or a piece of clothing, it is about facilitating different metabolic exchanges here. So these membranes of different sorts work as permeable interfaces. They are busy with selecting what molecules can enter the body's interior and which should remain outside, or managing the disposal of heat or of waste. Importantly, membranes are not something trivial. They are interfaces, they are structured, they are autonomous. As Laura Tripaldi again puts it, the interface is not an imaginary line that divides bodies from each other, but it is a material region, a marginal area with its own mass and thickness, characterized by properties that make it radically different from the bodies whose encounter produces it. So wearables are perfect examples of such thick interfaces, dense, thick, structured interfaces. The qualities of a fabric, of a cut, or different layers of garments, these all determine interactions with the environment. And this includes the air filtration or heat retention or the capacity to shield the body from external elements. Further, metabolisms are not only movements of matter and energy, because they also extend to information flows. This means that variables inevitably enter the realm of signaling, different games of biosemiotics, let's say. Think about your noise cancellation headphones. These are supreme modulators of your internal psychoclimate. They filter the external soundscape for you and create some internal psychological soundscape. Similarly, with the progressive embedding of portable electronics into garments and wearables, accessories of different kind, your clothes undergo something like a computational onboarding into an information realm. The upcoming integration of AI into the algorithmic affordances of smart clothes or wearables is again a non-trivial expansion of these membranes, because one day, smart glasses that provide real-time AI-assisted translation will be Earthsuits too. They will allow for some kind of nomadism, for some kind of cosmopolitan planetary community to arise. Now, glasses pivot to prosthetics. And when we talk about prosthetics, probably my favorite artifact to demonstrate how clothes and wearables can work like prosthetics is shoes. Shoes are the primary interface between the body and the planet. They are the supreme planetary interfaces because we literally stand on the planet's surface wearing shoes. In this sense, they are also primordial instruments of mobility. At the same time, the metaphor of expanded bodies finds its pop cultural articulations. It's everywhere from cyborgs to, say, mecha anime robots. I particularly adore these gigantic robots piloted by ordinary teenagers, such as Mobile Suit Gundam or Neon Genesis Evangelion series. The relationship between these robots and their human pilots exemplifies to me the complicated interplay between the clothing and its user. As in the story of the Evangelion's main character Shinji, sometimes it is the suit that pilots the human. Think about shoes again. They enhance walking range, speed, they provide extra support, they maintain the anatomy of the foot arc. Their integration into the body's structure expands beyond the simple fact of their attachment to the bottom of your legs. Because shoes work in tandem with muscles all the way up to the head, influence the activity of your spine, influence the movement of your pelvis. And they also provide a psychological interface that makes the sensation of walking on the planet's surface way more comfortable. Shoes exemplify thus the logic of prosthetics. They do not fix apparent deficiencies, but augment the body's extremities. What we mean by these extremities are different kinds of organic devices, peripheral organic devices, whether it's limbs, skins, biosemiotic systems, sensory apparatuses. In this sense, Tilly Loki's prosthetic designs capture this very well, and they seamlessly unite ornamentality with function. They turn jewelry into something like a genre of prosthetic technologies again. And we are so lucky to have Tilly Loki joining us in 2 weeks for a public lecture here. As for mobility, shoes also kickstart a long history of devices transforming the nature of moving through the different complicated environments. Think roller skates, think ice skates, skis, or snorkel fins. The same applies to helmets, goggles. These are appendages that allow for respiration or for visibility in vulnerable conditions. And the vulnerability, finally, for my part of this introduction to philosophy, lead me to total health and absolute fitness, the point 9 of the Earthsuits philosophy. Imagine, for a moment, that Earth would come with something like a care label. Judging from how poorly most of the Western population cares for its clothes, it would probably not make that much difference. But the idea of maintenance as an act of reproductive labor that connects clothing and environmental care in this case is worth additional probing. As an interface, for example, a face mask is an apparatus of personal hygiene that filters out the unwanted elements in the local atmosphere. At the same time, it is an instrument of collective maintenance, collective care for respiratory commons. By doing so, face masks point at something much more complex than a defensive posture towards one's personal health. It is a constructive act of relationality to wear a face mask. It is about acknowledging the inevitable contextuality of one's fitness. And to this extent, immunity is a property of the network of relations we design between the body and the environment. The open question then is, what should be the purview of collective environmental safeguards, and what should belong to the realm of personal hygiene, to the realm of self-care? Shall we consider planetary health and human health as different parts or different facets of one total health? Another pivot to health that is important for us at Earthsuits is care and maintenance in relationship to sports, athletics, and different exercises. The role of clothing here is again the enabling and enhancing one. A packable, windproof jacket is an invitation to jog in a grim weather. Football cleats give you extra stability on a football pitch slippery glass. And so, from the vantage point of total health, the everyday dimension of wearables as tools of individual enhancement ceases to be an affair of one's body's fitness. Instead, it is about collective fine-tuning of parameters of viable inhabitation of the Earth. This would be something we would call an absolute fitness. The motto of absolute fitness is that one is only as fit as the more than human assemblage one belongs to. And I'm passing the baton, talking about athletics and sports, back to Stephanie.
Thanks. Okay, point 10. We're almost done. The Earth wears us. This is our last philosophical point, and it's quite short but important, which is not only do we think about the ways that Earthsuits might sense ourselves, our internal state, all sorts of levels that we have in ways that currently we don't, but what if we flip the proposition a bit on its head and we imagine actually as the billions of humans traversing the planet as sensors for planet Earth? What if we are sort of the clothing and the wearables for the Earth itself? And that the Earth is using us and all of these augmentations on us to capture, to understand its climatic condition, to sort of be capturing these various local conditions in ways that currently our data just isn't that refined. So how can we actually become the appendages and extensions of the planet? Finally, I'll end before passing it to Xin just with an invitation to join us for the development of the first collection in Earthsuits London 2050. The students in MA Narrative Environments and MA Industrial Design are working on this all term as part of the collaborative unit. But we invite you to think about this proposition and collection with us. On February 12th, there's a lecture by the folks at Factory 15, who are kind of a world build and media agency, who will introduce us to the concept, and really intensive work on February 13th and 14th for students who either sign up in teams or you can sign up as an individual and we'll help create you a team and spend 2 days thinking through ideas with us. Lots of mentors are joining us on the 13th from industry and academia and friends all around King Cross. And then on the 14th, we'll culminate the day with an exhibition of all the work that's produced, prizes and judging, and a DJ set at the platform bar to celebrate not only Earthsuits, but Valentine's Day. So you can sign up on the website about this. And we have 5 conditions for that project. The projects must be scalable, so at some scale. They must be functional. They must be possible. These Earthsuits are for humans, although that's not to say there aren't Earthsuits for frogs and all sorts of things. We don't want to exclude them from the project, but in this particular brief in London, it's focused on humans, and we're asking you to contextualize it. So it must be put in a specific context that you're imagining that future must be like. So you can join us, sign up on the DIS event site, and you can follow us along, please, on Instagram, and you can also message us there if you have questions or ideas or thoughts. That's it for us. We'll just thank you so much. So we'll give the floor to Xin for a moment, and then we'll give it to Michael, and then we'll all come up at the panel. So, Xin.
Okay. Sorry, I prefer to use a mic because I cannot be as loud as those two. It was really, really nice to hear all about the initiative and all the projects. I only have 15 minutes, so very quick introduction. I'm an artist, engineer. I've been working in the field. Oh, it's not clicking. No, okay. So I'm an artist, an engineer, a researcher. I'm an immigrant. I'm a woman. I'm Chinese. I lived in the US for 10 years and now currently live in UK. So today I'm only going to talk about kind of roughly 3 projects of mine, but I think there's lots of works from my past lives. Well, I was a grad student back in MIT Media Lab that is kind of relevant to some more like a design thinking students here, so you can go online and find them. My design studio is called Slow Immediate, slowimmediate.com. And then the projects are more kind of looking into skin interfaces, looking into like sensor network, devices, wearable devices. I worked at Jacquard for Google ATAB for a little bit, which is the first initiative there to create this conductive thread that you use to make garments and then turn them into touch pads. But that's not what I'm not going to talk about today. I'm going to more talk about kind of my art practice. So if you're a designer, you want to go more technical, go to that website. So here you can see that this is the moment when American astronaut Ed White, when he first stepped out of the space station. I always like to start with this moment when I do presentation because it's such a heroic visual as a human being who kind of entering this new world, yet you can also see him only connected to everything, the human existence, via this umbilical cord around his wrist, this golden tether. So I think that's often what I struggle or fascinated about in my own practice, is how we keep innovating and going to places that's so unknown, so exciting, yet it kind of exposes us to this potential danger or question of who we are at the end. And this is me, really excited, very happy. When I first experienced a weightlessness in this airplane. So I'm gonna give a quick introduction of like parabolic flight. So essentially, the only way for humans to experience weightlessness without going to International Space Station or just leave, period, is to get on those planes that are called parabolic flights. And then you go up in the air and suddenly you kind of have this free fall. So it's this parabolic arc. So essentially the plane would go up and it free fall and then climb up again and free fall. So during those free fall moments, what happens is like everything falls in the plane and you start to experience weightlessness. So I'm gonna play this video, I think, the next one, if it plays. Maybe I think it's better to click it. Yeah. This is the, if you just use the, thank you. as you can tell, I was trying to do something during this parabolas. I was trying to shoot a thread out and drag myself forward. So essentially, I was trying to be a spider woman in space. The reason being, if you think about it, in zero gravity or microgravity, you don't really have the gravity to pull you down. So with a little kind of push at the beginning, you can keep moving towards the direction you want it to. So I figured that being a spider woman in space would be kind of easy. So I kind of made this little device that's kind of reversed fishing gear that shoots threads and then drag myself. And use a magnet and everything. It's rather simple design, but this moment for me was kind of philosophical because what I realized is like I did not actually fly as it seems to be. What happened is like the ground beneath me fell. So instead of like this kind of very uplifting sensation, what I had is this kind of sense of detachment, like something really helped me throughout my whole life. The ground fell beneath me. And then in the meantime, I was really totally had the loss of control. My feet was kicking around, I was trying to do this motion. I had a dance background, so I was rather confident at the beginning, but I was totally panicking. And there's one thing they keep telling everyone, the flyers, like, do not kick, because you're not in water, you're not kicking yourself moving forward. But because it felt similarly like in the water, so it was rather uncontrollable. I was kicking around and actually kicked one of my friends, which was really unfortunate. So this was kind of like my first experience with zero gravity. And then as you can see, I kind of dyed my hair blue, and I kind of trying to create a character similar like Lucas. I'm like a otaku. So I was always very fascinated around like world building, character design. So for this one, I wanted to create a character who is called the Warbit Weaver. Actually, I had a manga like draw for her, but we're not showing it here today. So the outfit came from that, and I worked with a theater costume designer who kind of drew the inspiration from flight suits and made that. So one thing we really learned is that in zero gravity, you do not want those dingly-dingling things around, because if you have a dress, they don't know what's up and what's down, and then what happens, very likely just gonna cover all your face throughout the duration of the flight. So you want something really tight. There's another project, another whole fashion collaboration I did for this parabolic flight. It's called From the Deep Sea to Deep Space. I did not put it here today, but it is more kind of towards fashion design. So what we did is like a very tight suit, but with like this tubing that is growing in the back. So inside which we have used this kind of new materials and talking about this kind of tentacles and etc. But it's more for visual representations. You can find it on my website or just Google it, From Deep Sea to Deep Space. But this is like really my first experience to think about outer space and the body and what it means to have a different body when we're there. And continuing it, I kind of totally switched gear, but not really. So this is my second body. I'll say my second version of the same project. So in Warbit Weaver, I was the person shooting threads in the simulated space environment. And this, in Living Distance, I was building an avatar, a simulated me, but in the actual space environment. So I had a mechanical engineering background, so I built this robot all from scratch myself. It has all the technical components, but the core of it is really a similarly shooting threads and drag itself. So I'm trying to create a robot I can mimic the movement I wanted to achieve with my own body. And then we launched the work not International Space Station, that's some other pieces. This one went to the suborbital space. It was launched in 2019 with New Shepard system for Blue Origin. This is just a clip of rocket going up. I thought it's cool, but you won't see my work. My work is like at the very tip of it. And this is when the rocket came back. Yeah, and this is, it's okay, thank you. This is a moment of the robot floating in zero gravity. Actually, the footage taken inside the payload, 100 kilometers above the Earth. So at the tip of it, you can see there's a little like wisdom tooth. So I see lots of Chinese people here. So there's an old Chinese saying, it's like if you were little and you lose the teeth, if you're the top tooth, you bury it on the ground. And if your bottom tooth, you toss it up high to the ceiling for good luck. So that was my bottom wisdom tooth. So for me, I was really thinking about, how to create an avatar version of me. If I think about it, it's like the skin being the glass, the bones being the metal, the blood being the electronic systems. I have a computers, which is the CPU, and the soul, which is my bone, my genes, the teeth. So for me, this is kind of another version of what happens when we really traverse beyond the earthbound, because the organic body we have isn't just meant for it. That's why we need to have earth suits. We need to have space suits to like protect ourselves. But if you really think beyond, if one day Elon Musk trying to create a civilization out there on Mars, I think all his friends is going to just be different kind of robots, because that makes a lot more sense to sustain life in that way. So for this work, I created 2-channel video, and the film is really kind of telling the story from the perspective of my tooth. It was premiered at Sundance right before the pandemic hit. Gravity anchors our existence on Earth. What is it like to be so light, floating, spinning, detached from what we know? That's just a trailer. So the next project I'm going to quickly talk about is called The Cryo. So this is the third kind of third idea, thoughts I have, whatever, around what it means to have our body being out there beyond the Earth, and maybe like traverse not just the space but also time. So I'm in my 30s. So for the first time ever, I started to look into egg freezing. And that's when I realized it's very much the same technology as cryogenics, which often used as a science fiction narrative device for one of the protagonists, often a dude, to live through centuries and conquer the world. So I got very interested in the narrative around technologies that meant to manipulate biological time. So what does it mean to be a vessel in that case, right? Because we have this body as women, or maybe some men also share the same feelings, that we are individuals, but also we're kind of part of this larger ecosystems, a population that meant to last itself. Is really interesting in the American right now. There's a narrative about like how the declining birth rate, it is like a moral saying, as it is our fundamental human high goal to reproduce and keep continuing the life, which everyone might have different feelings about. So around this whole series, I've been looking a lot into like technological fantasies. It's more about like making sculptures and works here, creating scenarios and thinking about what it means to have lives that is not just individual, but as a collection. And thinking about interventions like the human embryos and eggs and sperm banks, similarly like how we have seed bank in Svalbard. Because now we are collecting seeds from all over the world, and to store them in this cold Arctic spaces in order for one day when the climate catastrophe hit us so badly that we need to re-resurrect all those plants. But at the same time, we took them out of the moment to be able to evolve and adapt and to live their moments as they're supposed to be right now. So this is one of the first pieces. It's called the mothership. So you can see the mouse part is really the point or moment of intervention. It is actually a bronze piece that I casted out of my own mouth. But what you're seeing right now, the layer of white things is actually a layer of frost. So I created a customized cooling system right behind the sculpture. So the bronze piece is just so cold. There's a layer of frost growing continuously on the sculptures throughout the duration of the exhibition. And there's some other pieces in this series. I've been thinking a lot about how women's body changes during pregnancy. The labor as a worker, a person with her own desires, and labor as the mother, and potentially how we understand time and how its reproductivity and productivity. And last, this piece is really coming from a conversation when I talked with one of my friends when she told me that during her pregnancy, the hormones in her body is making her bones getting so soft, and then her ribs were actually able to open up in order to make space for the baby. It kind of like break my brain a little bit, because at the beginning, when I was making the living distance work, in the video, I had a sentence talking about how bones are the hardest of the body. They're the essence of our souls. So when she was telling me how her body was able to maneuver and become soft for this new being, I just feel like it's a new moment for me to understand how my own existence will last or change. And if you're in London, which you are, you can see this work. This is a new one, also in the same series. Right now on view at Public Gallery as part of the group show. But if you want to see the actual frosting and the physical sculpture in person, you should go to the gallery. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Xin. And now we'll turn online to hear a little bit from Michael. It's really wonderful just to, as a moment while we transition, CSM has formed schools, as many of you may know. We have C School, which is Culture School, S School, which is Systems School, and M School, which is Material School. And part of our goal for tonight was to bring some perspectives from each of those schools to this conversation, many different ways of doing this and interpreting this. So how are we? Hi, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Great.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. We'll just pull you up on the big screen, so give us one moment.
Sure.
There we go. Great. Take it away.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I hope this flat avatar can do the job. So today I'm going to present, I guess, more talk about some of the thinking behind an ongoing research project I've been developing called the Red Earth Project. And let me just see if I can get this up first of all. Okay, so hopefully that should work. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Is it the screen with,
It's a desktop.
I can't see them. Oh, okay. Well, that's the wrong screen. Bear with me a second. So I'm going to try again. How about this one?
Yep, yep. All good, Michael. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So I was having a casual conversation with a friend the other day, during which they mentioned that they now need to consider where to travel and when, due to the increasingly dangerous heat from the sun. And I guess this is nothing novel, but I've realized that this is the first time I noticed this travel kind of consideration come up in casual conversation. Skin protection often seems to be quite removed from the really precise facts of climate change. Now, the friend in question does have skin particularly vulnerable to the sun, but this conversation stayed in my mind for some reason. And later I wondered why, and I realized I was stumbling upon another way to engage my sort of ongoing interest in embodied language, namely, how we speak with our bodies, how they contribute to language, particularly across cultures, how that differs, but also how language can be used as a weapon and as a tool and a resource which contributes to our ecosystem's changes. For example, look at how energy-intensive language learning models are currently. Now, following long-established methodologies of competition, pass instructions to computers, these computers then use energy to interpret our instructions and create solutions for us. As I'm sure you know, most of this energy is acquired through long-established extractive methods and relies heavily on natural resources. A lot of this resource acquisition derives from violent conquest started during the era of colonialism and slavery, and over time was sort of gradually softened into somewhat unscrupulous business relationships with the resource-rich countries to ensure wealth doesn't trickle down into their social infrastructure. Making sure corrupt officials take the helm of resource-rich countries, often by assassinating progressive leaders or making life very difficult for progressive organizations, helps ensure these business deals remain cheap across Africa and Asia. Resource extraction and its wastes are primarily responsible for our changing climate. Many of us are now aware of these power dynamics. Still, through obfuscation, we have in many ways been effectively removed from the ways we are complicit and how these legacies directly inform our society today. What we see and don't see, what we know and don't know, the role language plays in establishing erasures, and sometimes a kind of narrow understanding of history. So I wonder, how effective can our solutions be if we do not know or care where and how our problems originate? And when are solutions delusions? Humanism is a philosophy emphasizing the value, dignity, and potential of human beings, focusing on reason, ethics, and human experience, rather than religious or supernatural beliefs. Except ethics, in this very European humanist sense, mainly comes from religion. And strategically, the rhetoric of humanism arose with slavery. Now, this is a key moment in establishing an idea of what a human is, and was shored up through early, sometimes questionable scientific and humanistic scholarship, which did a lot to center a specific human. Simultaneously, the same European power structure put this rhetoric into practice worldwide to garner support back home, making extracting resources, including human resources, that much easier. So if the idea of who is human is centered on the Europeans and their descendants, then a feedback loop with its citizens strengthens this idea and renders anyone outside of this somewhat lower down the ladder. Now, deep down there, in the mines and below the seabeds, are also conveniently those resources required to further this idea of human through technological progress, and we can see now where a lot of this has led us. Our ecosystems are unsettled, while the powers that be lobby fantasies of interplanetary colonization, following these same principles, leaving the rest of us to grapple with a benevolent but sometimes pretty uncompromising sun. So I'm thinking of my friend and their words, which they used to explain their concerns about the sun, their exposure to the sun. And I think of the damage words can do and have done. Words can shape how we see the world. And now, through computation, we can use words to automate the same dominant view of the world. Except language is definitely more than just words. I'm interested in the universal we and how this pronoun is utilized as a mode of erasure, because it's pretty clear that we does not apply to everyone. So in my work, I look beyond the traditional contours of human and post-human definitions, and instead look to the post-human as what lies beyond and before the humanist idea. Now, as Edward Said puts succinctly in his book, The Question of Palestine, he says, among the supposed juridical distinctions between civilized and non-civilized peoples was an attitude towards land, almost a doxology about land, which non-civilized people supposedly lacked. A civilized man, it was believed, could cultivate the land because it meant something to him. On it, accordingly, he bred useful arts and crafts, he created, he accomplished, he built. For an uncivilized people, land was either farmed badly, i.e. inefficiently by Western standards, or it was left to rot. From this string of ideas, by which whole native societies who lived on American, African, and Asian territories for centuries were suddenly denied their right to live on that land, came the great dispossessing movements of modern European colonialism, and with them, all the schemes for redeeming the land, resettling the natives, civilizing them, taming their savage customs, and turning them into useful beings under European rule. Land in Asia, Africa, and the Americas was there for European exploitation because Europe understood the value of land in a way impossible for the natives. Now note the use of the word value, implying the land could only be seen as valuable as a material resource to push forward this sole approach to progress. Discounting the thousands of years natives have lived in harmony with their respective environments, including all the fauna and the flora. This progress in no time at all has accelerated us into this state of brinkmanship, with a climate now changing and willing maybe to make life very difficult for us as it attempts to survive. So I wonder, is the potential for the human condition actually limited by its lack of imagination or exposure to knowledge? Is the human technological imagination limited by this humanistic framework, which might restrict imaginative potential due to this separation from other dimensions of life? And I include human life in this. Is it possible to imagine progressive technological futures with this exceptionalism upheld? I pay much attention to the ways the legacies of this exceptionalism are carried into the technological space, and how we now look to establish technological solutions without communing with the knowledge of the dead across cultures that had managed to live with the earth. This technological space then perpetuates society's blind spots in how it educates about historical economic decisions, shaping our limited worldview. Some even question why things like diversity initiatives, which don't actually delve deep enough culturally and historically, are necessary. If we do not educate our society about who they are and how they were formed, and why baseless racial disparities, for example, are used for economic purposes, then it's expected we will not understand nor be curious enough to ask. So what happens when this ill-informed and incomplete worldview becomes computationally automated? Curiously enough, some computational methods, such as those originating in statistics, come from a very subjective and essentially monotheistic European tradition. So what do we accept as the way forward? This is part of the line of thought driving my ongoing artistic research project, the Red Earth Project. Started in 2019, this transdisciplinary work of chorus process-based creations brings cross-cultural prose explorations together with machine translation as a theoretical exercise mainly to draw attention to the precarious status of non-Western cultural heritage, knowledge systems and practices as data-driven systems, virtual architectures and AI technologies dominate our social and cognitive landscapes. I ask what it means for us if computation implements a dominant worldview and morality. For example, African languages which exist in their thousands and did so long before bureaucratic national borders were established by European countries in 1884, have been compressed to just a few main languages and datasets used to power language learning models. This computational automation of language and communication says very little about embodied language. And what do I mean by embodied language? As a writer of prose, I've long been interested in how our respective environments, atmospheres, types of land, flora, fauna, customs all contribute to language, and how we speak with our bodies. I began this project with some questions. How can we imagine futures without equitable knowledge exchange? Is knowledge exchange only possible through language? And how does the way we use language differ across cultures? Before this research project, I focused on Yoruba traditions, as this is where I'm from, and their embodiments of language in gesture, movement, objects, artworks, and dress. I wonder whether a kind of virtual visualization of distillations from a space between cultures, between my sort of Western culture and my indigenous culture, and was possible. Or is computation by its foundational principles anathema to other metaphysical dimensions than the one from whence it came? The artistic outputs of this theoretical exploration begin with photography. I use photography to take notes and brainstorm, even if the photographs hold some kind of artistic merit in themselves. This isn't their primary function. They help to lay the foundations of my research. From here, I wrote a book-length work of prose, which grapples with some of these key questions and more, exploring what it means to exist across cultures and also across physical and digital realities. Taking its lead from Yoruba philosophical tradition, this prose became the source data for a series of translation experiments. Combining a series of models, I export images, meshes, and patterns from my prose to develop materials and artworks. I then use these materials to hand-make sculptural forms, evoking how stories in the Yoruba tradition are often told through objects and through artworks. These forms then return to other artworks as interventions, a process-based, ongoing feedback loop of human and machine collaboration. It's mainly a theoretical exercise to demonstrate a space of inquiry, because seeing an idea like this right through would require a deeper structural analysis of Western computational methods, but I am sort of gradually working on that. I've created a speculative meditation on what equitable exchange between cultures and computation and different ideas of morality could become, where different modes of translation become a continuous, non-linear process to draw attention to the need for new archives and materials for the future, and new ways to think about computational existence. The chemical processes of Red Earth in West Africa become a metaphor for my artistic translations between forms, an illustration of crossing knowledge systems, languages, and literary sources. I'm less concerned with specific objects of beauty or a particular output or goal. My focus is on continuing forth ideas and language through forms, which is evocative of Yoruba non-linear experiences of time through the body and beyond, the body's relationship with the sun, with time and space, with the non-human environment. Through these experiments, I'm thinking about how language can become material through extractive usage, but also synthesis. You can see the way native communities live alongside natural elements. What could this look like in computation? Traditional Yoruba practices use many elements to tell stories beyond sounds from the throat and the chest. And with this project, I sort of invert this process and attempt to create equitable materials from language, which may serve as the basis for thinking about non-hierarchical and non-extractive materials of the future. Red Earth is really a speculative theoretical exercise about language and data, and whose language, whose history and authority and morality are now encoded into our digital reality. I'd like to know if our current trajectory were only entrenched in negation covered here in feedback loops much faster and more granular than we can comprehend. and whether there's any room at all for provenance within this data, or is it inherently flawed? Is this simply the underwhelming and sort of often violent trajectory for the autonomy of alternate cultures, moral ideas, and outlooks as their lands of origin shudder and succumb to climate damage? Are these works that I'm making here rhetorical aberrations, or are they the beginnings of possibilities? And that's my speech. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael. I think in the interest of time, because we're going to end at 7, we'll actually invite all the panelists to come up and then open it up to you all potentially for questions for any of us or all of us together. So come join me. Keshawn, Steph, can you moderate this group?
Yeah, of course.
It can be thoughts too.
Does anyone want a microphone?
Speak.
Yeah, so you're asking how did I come with the forms and materials for the cryo series? So it was kind of intuitive. I know it's not a very good answer. But part of it is like I really want to have something that is like both looking a bit ancient. I don't want something that looks so technographic, like in the current moment. So I think the relief, like it's made of silicone, is relief. I feel like is it kind of pays some attribute to like something may look a bit more in the classical realm, but at the same time, you know, the technology, the thinking is really present. So I have to kind of embedded the cooling system in it. So I kind of was leaving that all exposed. So it's not like I'm hiding tech behind it. So I feel like I was trying to find an aesthetic that's like future and past at the same time. So that's kind of really the guiding thoughts when I was like trying to push the work aesthetically.
That was wonderful, number one, like really inspiring and really happy.
So everybody can hear. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for that. It was really inspiring, really a wonderful hour and a half of my time, and I hope everyone else's. And as a footwear designer who designed shoes for 18 years, I am really on the same line of thought sort of you. I've always seen feet as the architecture of the body. So what you were saying before about, you know, being the first point of contact with the earth, yes, 100%. I also, through my own personal projects, I've always considered shoes to be a second skin almost. I was wondering, not just to do with shoes, but also in the whole fashion context, fashion discussion in general, was where do you see, I don't really know how to say this, but where do you think would be the first best starting point? Is there a segment of the market that you think this could be applied to? Whilst you were talking, I've been taking a lot of notes because it really, everything you said is very in line with something that I'm working on. I have my own personal views on where projects or ideas could be developed and who and which target market they could be first, I don't want to say experimented on, but directed at. Do you have your own views on how that, where that could start?
Perhaps it's infiltration. Lukáš, I'm going to give it to you because this is your favorite area.
I'd love to, yeah. The immediate, kind of the immediate idea that I would perhaps like to explore a little bit more in this context is related to the shoes and their psychological effect on the feeling of being on the earth. And I'm a fan of Five Fingers, Vibrams, and it's because they give me this additional sensation of the texture, which is many times lost in changing the terrain through which I traverse in shoes. And I'm not saying that necessarily Five Fingers are a good reference here, but I feel that the texture is like a new sensation related to walking that can be perhaps a little bit more explored, also in relationship to understanding how the planet is actually below our feet, or right like in this kind of like an intimate relationship between the feet and the surface. So perhaps that also gives it also like makes me think a little bit more about sensory enhancement in general, and how the shoes are not only here to provide the function in the immediate sense of mobility, but can be the sensing device, perhaps also in the sense how, Stephanie, you were talking about how the earth wears us. And in this sense, there is something like a possibility of like a design negative perspective, where actually we don't think that much about how the shoe attaches to the foot, but how actually the earth is worn by us. That basically, like, what matters is everything that is from here onwards in our experience of walking and in our experience of mobility with shoes. So this is just like a couple of immediate questions or like ideas I would have in relation to shoes, because I find them fascinating as tools of mobility, really, but also as tools of sensation, experiencing. They have a certain art of aesthetics, of sensing inherent in themselves.
Just to build on that, we really invite those of you who have a lot of thoughts and interest in this area. There's like a whole shoe unit that could form around the Earthsuits project that I think is exciting and relevant. And I know Rachel Pearl, who also works with us closely, would be excited because she also has a history of shoes and footwear. But I'm also thinking about this question in relation to what we heard from you, saw and heard from you, Xin, about zero gravity. And were you wearing shoes in that? And like, how did shoes matter at that moment? Or you said you kicked someone, and like, what's the footwear vibe in gravityless space? And then I'll also open it up to Michael, because as you were talking, Michael, I was thinking about dislocation as both the kind of in the interstitial spaces between language, and like both your work, Xin, in terms of dislocation in space, but then this other question of location and dislocation, and how shoes kind of play this role in this. They're the kind of like nomadic apparatus that, as we're displaced or returning, kind of bring us there. They're the vehicle. So
just to answer the question really practically, so the first time when I did parabolic flight, I wore like very tight leather boots because I was wearing the space flight suit, the design. So I want something to just match. By the way, the suit I was wearing, we used a bunch of like as 3M reflective material, as like if we do like the camera ready shots, we can have flash, and everything else will be black. It's like more like me actually in space. So that was the kind of design thinking around the fashion gears. But because I was wearing the boots, I did kick someone, and that does not feel good. So the second round, I was more wearing this kind of really soft, like tight, like ballet shoes, but like leather ballet shoes. So maybe in actual space, you want something not so hardened anymore, because you're not really interacting with the ground like we are doing right now. It's like really like a soft padding is kind of everything, because you're just literally bouncing around consistently. So just to answer the question really quick. Michael? Oh, can I hear you?
Oh, sorry.
I muted myself, sorry. But I was just going to say that I'm quite interested in the way that or how, thinking about the body in relation to its environment, the environment that you're in, as opposed to being separate from it. So it's really interesting to listen to all of your talks in that respect. Because I'm thinking about, like what you were saying, Stephanie, imagine also a shoe that can also then adapt to the environment, as in like the foot needs to perspire, the body needs to respire, and having these kind of like these wearable items that have that kind of porousness that actually are in a kind of very smart dialogue with each environment could be sort of quite an interesting thing, because you think about the way organisms react to different environments. You move a plant from one place to another, and there's a very profound reaction there. And I'm sort of imagining like taking some of these kind of more metaphysical, like cognitive things into wearables as part of like finding a way to kind of react to shifting climates.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hello, everyone. So I think there's been a lot of discussions about like 2050 and kind of what sort of environments or microenvironments we're creating and responding to. And I think throughout the presentation, we've also seen how specific types of jobs and labor require these different types of outfits. And so I'm kind of curious to know what you guys think about how maybe these wearable technologies create like new avenues for labor that is jeopardizing or exploitive, or whether that it can also open up these opportunities for new types of jobs, that further us and further our understandings of our relations to the environment and technology. So I'm just kind of curious to know what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Awesome. Thanks for. Oh, I forgot.
Super. And it's such a good question because we talked a lot about workwear, but not as much about obviously the process of labor, of production, of all of these things. That's so much a factor of fashion and globalization and all of this. And so I think this is one thing that we really hope as the students explore and that we're exploring, we're really taking this on board as a kind of speculative exercise. I think now what we're seeing, maybe surprisingly to some, is that maybe people feel more like cognitive jobs or like more routine cognitive jobs are more currently at risk than some of the jobs of physically dealing with the environments that we have around us. And potentially that as climate change continues, there's probably a lot more potential for and a lot more need for that kind of physical labor that we'll probably need to do alongside machines rather than just be, it's going to be hard for robots to do a lot of, we'll need them, but we'll probably also need augmentations on our own body to use them. And there's tons of invention, I think, that we'll continue to need to do, which is where I see a lot of potentially new jobs coming in to actually figure out how we navigate terrain at all sorts of scales. So actually the question of invention, design, development around this stuff is a potential source. But at every step, I think as we challenge ourselves to think about 2050, and thank you for bringing this to the table, we really do want to challenge also the paradigm of labor that has come before in terms of this and bring it to the conversation around what we should be doing in its production. I don't know if you want to add to Lukáš.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question because it makes me think about the relationship between labor and maintenance. Labor and care, labor in maintenance. With respect, when I talk about care here, it's care for the product, care for the object, care for the artifact. And it feels like today, with the exploitative system of producing, we are too much on the side of a lot of labor-intensive making and a very little maintenance, and the less maintenance, the more labor-intensive actually the production is. So how do we actually flip this relationship so that the maintenance becomes perhaps the focus of what usership is about? and another factor, of course, here is like what Stephanie is doing a lot of research on, which is automation. And the way, like, what do we want to automate? Do we want to automate production? Do we want to automate care and maintenance? I mean, there's so much space for redistributing different kinds of activities and rituals of everyday life. And this is the part of Earthsuits too, like thinking about the implicit economies that these different artifacts and objects we are designing are prone to either erase or enhance and change.
I think there's restlessness about, do we have any urgency for the last question, or shall we call it there?
Thank you so much. It was really interesting. I was wondering, since it's set in an environment that's changing to the worse because of man-made or human-made decisions, is there a deep function around variables as well that could be interpreted as like change-making or healing or reversing? So kind of, I thought it was funny how the interface you guys talked about, it seemed kind of like a one-way street from the environment and then changing towards us so we can adapt to the changing environment. But how can we also change the environment through variables and technology?
Yeah, I think maybe we didn't make this as explicit, but our starting point is really that the environment is changing us and we're changing the environment. And this is like a constant, dynamic, reciprocal process. But I think it's also a really good provocation as a starting point, is like, what are the kinds of wearables that not only have like less impact in one way or more impact on another, but actually how can we organize that impact so that whatever the wearable is, it allows us to do things to the environment that we view as healthy or good. Like, it's not only that we want to protect ourselves from filtered air, right? What if we're actually wearing things that support the filtration of the air around us? So that like this dynamic is super important in terms of, I had a conversation about this today, and it's like, this is not just about going into our little individual shell and protecting us from the crazy world around us and allowing that world to just get worse and worse. It's actually about the membrane and interface that you're creating, is that like, this should be totally reciprocal. That should be fundamental to how we're thinking about every part of this, from the scale of what immediately happens to the whole systems around how it's produced and what the impact is and what the life cycle is and maintenance, as you're saying. So it's a great point to bring up, and we will make it more explicit in our next round of this philosophy, that this is really fundamental to it. I don't know if you want to add anything, or Michael? Anyone is a last?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I feel like the Wizard of Oz up here. But, no, actually, your question just made me think about a story I published about 3 years ago. And this is a kind of speculative short fiction piece, which was looking at like potential futures for like, you know, CRISPR gene editing and things like the haptic technologies. Like, so, you know, maybe we're at a point in which we can delve really deeply into the kind of research that will help us understand how other organisms relate to the planet, you know, and thinking through their bodies. For example, like the octopus. Obviously, the octopus has a completely different cognition, and like, as far as I understand, its entire body is used in that way. And so through learning a lot of these kind of, you know, essentially more extraterrestrial technologies, we then were able to kind of establish a way to, through our own haptics and like haptic wearables, translating some of this technology into kind of healing the planet. So it was a leap, but it was based on kind of obviously a lot of the kind of research methods that we are establishing now. And I can imagine a future in that sense where we're thinking more about wearables, where we're not just looking at how looking, like I said in my talk, kind of through this sort of humanistic function, but we can actually speak to other organisms and learn a lot through them as well.
I think we're going to wrap it because of the restlessness, but we're really happy to talk to you one-on-one or come up and chat, and we really hope to see you at future events. We're here all month exploring this, so please join us in many forms. And if you're excited to get involved in whatever way, just ping us on Insta. That's you can just message us directly, or you can send us an email in slow mode, and we'll take a few extra days to get back to you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much.